All right, folks. This time we are still looking at History 111. We're looking at Unit 1, but this is Chapter 2. And so this is kind of important stuff. There's some differences in what's happening. We have gone through the evolution of man. We have gotten up to Homo sapiens sapiens, the thinking man, sinking man. We have gone from the Paleolithic, the Old Stone Age, into the Neolithic, the New Stone Age at this particular point. And remember that dividing point. Is early on we have cultivation. Cultivation is the taking and intentionally transplanting or planting of certain plants and crops. Early on, we figure out what we can eat, we figure out what we can nurture, we figure out what we can utilize, and we begin transporting that. A good example of that is here in the hills of North Carolina. You will find certain bends in rivers and creeks, and in the bends and rivers and creeks, you will find certain reeds. And in many of the areas, those bends and crooks in the river are former Native American, former Cherokee encampments. And what happened is when the Cherokee were more transitory, when they were moving to summer quarters versus winter quarters, what they would do is they would take the reeds with them and transplant them into the area so they would be readily available to use, because they would use them for creating baskets. They would use them for creating mats. They could actually eat certain parts of the roots and the cattails along the way, and they would use them for different things. So what they would do is they would take them and plant them in the different encampment areas and cultivate the growth of the reeds to be able to use them later. It was also done with several other things. We'll get into talking about corn and stuff a little bit later on, but that's the thing is we shift from cultivation to agriculture, and the agriculture is going to be growing plants, intentionally growing and planting crops, raising in some cases livestock, but that agriculture is going to be creating a sedentary population. The sedentary population is going to be huge because that allows us to gather in larger groups. And what's going to happen, one of the first places this happens on full scale is the area of the Middle East that we call Mesopotamia. And Mesopotamia is actually the area, that means Mesopotamia means the land between rivers, or between two rivers. And so the area itself, the two rivers are important, and hopefully you figured out what the name of them, but it is the Tigris and the Euphrates. And they're right there in the heart of what we think of as the Middle East, right there in the heart of what they call the Fertile Crescent. And the Fertile Crescent is important because literally it is a crescent of fertile land that goes up around this way. It's in the Middle East. It's nestled between the two rivers, so we have this ready source of water. We have this abundant temperate zone of temperature, and so there's a wide open area which is largely a floodplain, which is problematic at certain points along the way. But there's also two mountain ranges, and so it funnels the people into this area as far as an habitable living space. And so what happens is this is a large gathering point, and because it's such a large gathering point, we get several different groups of people, several different civilizations. And one of the things you have to think about at this point is the Middle East, is we start talking about biblical times. And these are some of the biblical people that we're talking about. So keep this in mind, because really this is Old Testament time period. If you're one of the Christian folks, it's Old Testament. If you're indeed not Christian, but you might be Islamic, again, Old Testament applies to you. If you are Jewish, again, Old Testament applies to you. Different names of the text along the way, but this is that Neolithic time period where we're gathering together, and because we're in this wide open plain, we're going to look at the construction of complex societies. There's going to be some people that are farmers. There's going to be some people that, because now we can farm, because now we can grow enough food to feed everybody, that there's an abundance of food, we end up developing this complex society in such a way that, listen, several groups of people living together, we're going to have some form of government, we're going to have some form of politics. If we're going to unite people in a purpose, then we've got to have a unified culture, and that unified culture and the need for a central authority usually means we end up in not only politics but religion. And religion becomes one of the major driving forces in the area, because in this area of the world, we start to look at city gods. There's not only regional gods, but there's city gods as well. And the city gods are going to be important, because one of the first cities we talk about is Ur. And one of the first places we talk about in the region is Sumer. But there is a god of Ur, and usually the city is named after the god itself. But in this formation of a complex society, we have a structure of rule or be ruled. But also what we look at is we look at the introduction of, since not everyone has to farm, that we are indeed are going to have pastoralists, groups of people who are raising not crops, but they're raising livestock. So they are raising goats, they're raising camels, in some cases they're going to be later on raising horses, and they're going to trade with the sedentary population of people who are the farmers and to get what they need. And so that's going to be important because it's trade. And trade is part of creating that complex society as well. But also in the complex society, people can't have food without some way to store an abundance of food. And so we start to look at craftsmen, we start to look at trade in such a way that you're going to have people that don't farm, but who make pottery, who make baskets. We're going to evolve. Eventually, we're going to get to the Bronze Age. We're going to get into mining and metalworking. And we're going to create other things. So there's also going to be artwork. There's going to be metalworking. The religion is going to take a more prominent place because what's going to happen is there's only so much area here in Mesopotamia that is farmable, what we call arable land. And arable land is going to be at a premium. And so when people start to compete for the resources, well, my group of people want these resources, your group of people want these resources, and we're going to end up struggling for the resources. Well, in order to struggle for the resources, we're going to end up warring, we're going to end up fighting. Each group is going to create what we call a city-state. And the city-states, this is going to be the rise of the city-states. And this is also because we live in wide open plains, it is going to be the rise that we know as walled cities. Okay, a walled city is easier to defend. The big gates is easier to defend. So again, we start thinking in biblical terms about walled cities, about Jericho, about Babylon a little bit later on. But we start to see these this rise in cities, but also rise in cities requires a bit of a fortress. It also requires a bit of a basis for building on. So we start to look at certain things that come up here. One of the big things we look at is going to be the center ziggurat. And the center ziggurat, it's kind of like a pyramid, but it's not. A ziggurat is going to be what we call it's probably closer to what we know as a step pyramid. Its foundation is what we call a mastaba, a flat block, rectangular block that has an indentation in the earth itself that goes down like a peg on a Lego block. But a ziggurat is going to be one mastaba stacked on top of another mastaba, another mastaba, and another mastaba. So kind of like a step pyramid, but in a slightly different construction. This is important because this becomes the centerpiece of the city, and the rest of the city walls are built around that. But this is where we're going to house the deities, where we're going to house the religion, and in housing the religion and the priests, this becomes the centerpiece of the city, but also the centerpiece of what becomes rule and politics. And religion is going to become the centerpiece of the city because he who controls the religion controls the city. If you're going to gather that many people together, we've got to feed an awful lot of people. In order to feed an awful lot of people, you've got to grow a lot of crops. In order to grow a lot of crops in an arid environment, even though we're close to the rivers, an arid environment requires getting water from here to the field. And so we're going to look at the invention of irrigation and irrigation ditches. Well, here's the thing. Irrigation ditches don't dig themselves. Since we need a unifying factor, we're going to have to go ahead and talk to the people. It's like, listen, in order to feed people, we need to dig ditches. In order to dig ditches, we need you to grab a shovel. And, well, we've determined by talking to the priest that it will keep the god happy, and he will be pleased should you dig the ditches and transport this water to the fields. He'll consider it a blessing. Well, here's the thing. If it's a blessing and it's going to keep the God happy, then people are going to be more apt to do it. And so we start to look at the use of religion to control the people. I'm going to leave it here and pick up on the next one, and we'll talk more about the organization of a complex society.